Well, my name's Jeff Powell. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. I started off as a staff engineer. Really, my first job was answering phones and whatnot at Kiva Studios here in town. I went from there and I got a job answering phones and being what they call a night guy at Ardent Studios. From there, I just kind of worked my way up through the ranks. Started off being an assistant engineer, eventually got to start recording a few jingles here and there, and then I started engineering more and more. Got a few major label projects under my belt, and eventually moved on to producing. So now I mostly produce and engineer the records that I work on. Some of my credits, I guess, as far as producing goes, some of the recent things I've done are I just worked on a project for a Denzel Washington movie called The Great Debaters. I co-produced that soundtrack for that, which was a lot of fun. It involved Sharon Jones, Alvin Youngblood Hart, and a group called the Carolina Chocolate Drops. That was a lot of fun. Kind of carried on through the last 6 months off and on. I've also just last year finished a record with the Bottle Rockets, a band called the Centromatic, who are from Denton, Texas, that I really, really like. I'm producing a record on Susan Marshall right now. A blues artist out of New York City named Paul Mark. Some of the past bigger credits maybe I've had are Bob Dylan. Did 3 records with the Afghan Wigs, Tonic, Alvin Youngblood Hart again, and Stevie Ray Vaughan, actually. I mixed live at Carnegie Hall record of his. And Big Star. Yeah, Big Star produced that record about 2 years ago, I think. It works both ways. I think it depends on the individual, whether you want to engineer and produce. I like doing that. That was my background. I came up as an engineer. I've tried couch producing, as I call it, a couple of times, and I didn't really like it. I felt I felt like I needed to be more involved. Well, and the fact is that I know just so intuitively when I'm engineering something, when I want to change a sound or do something, I can just reach up and do it quickly, or reach over and grab, whatever outboard gear I might be using. And I can do things without looking, or I just do it with my ears. To try to describe that to another person, like if I'm hearing like, boy, that guitar sounds really dull, I want some edge to it, trying to describe what frequency they might want to look for, or just do it, I find myself over their shoulder, and I've had that happen to me before, and I'm just more of a hands-on guy. So personally, I prefer to engineer and produce when I'm working. Is it an advantage to be an engineer as well as producing? I've worked with both kinds, and again, some of the best producers I've ever worked with that I've learned the most from were engineers. Some of them weren't. What comes to mind, I got to do 6 records with Tom Dowd. Of course, he was one of the guys who pioneered the whole modern day recording technology. Really, it all kind of started with him, in a way. I've also got to work with Glenn Johns, who was a fantastic engineer and producer. And then I've worked with Jim Dickinson before too, who I'm not saying he doesn't have the engineering background, but he doesn't reach over and grab the knobs so much. He tells you what he wants, or lets you do your thing, and kind of guides the whole process that way too. He's a master at that. So it depends, what band, what the team is associated. I don't think any one way's just by the book better than the other. One of the things I feel like I can do is adapt to either situation. There's still a fair amount of projects where I'm engineering or mixing and I'm not producing. I'm completely comfortable with that too. So I'm not saying I have to produce everything I work on. It just turns out that at this stage of my career, it ends up being that way a lot of times. I am a musician. I play piano, guitar. I played trumpet when I was younger. I'm not very good, but I really enjoy it. I play mostly for me, and I am schooled in all the theory and things like that, so that really helps me speak the language. I can talk to a guitar player or piano player, and I can call out chords, and I know what a diminished chord sounds like, and a minor and a major, and all things in between. I'm not proficient enough to say, here, let me show you what I mean on that guitar solo, grab the guitar and go do-do-do-do-do-do, and play it for them. Now you play it and put your name on it. I'm not that kind of producer, but I can talk to them about specific music things. So I think it's a big advantage to be schooled in music theory especially, and to have some sort of proficiency on at least one instrument. You know, the piano seems to be the master thing, to where you can play the piano, you understand keys and chord changes and structure, which all are applied through rock and roll music. If you have a good classical background, you can definitely understand. Mix that with the real world experience. When someone says, you know, I want to do punch me in on the 4 chord on this blues progression, you better know what they're talking about without having to back up the tape, listen, is that what you mean? You know, I can just do it. So I think that is an advantage, to be able to speak the language. Analog versus digital, it's gotten a lot better. When I started engineering major label stuff, we had, at Ardent Studios, we had 3 of those 32-track Mitsubishi machines, which were fairly new technology and very expensive at the time. Those were all digital, and we were all kind of just thrilled with the technology because it was digital. But the main thing that I found out, it's as we've gone on, and it seems like every major studio has a Pro Tools rig or some sort of DAW system. Pro Tools seems to be the standard. Is that I think in the beginning, the way I was taught to engineer and the way I was used to hearing things back, when you recorded to analog tape, it affected the sound that came back. If you were listening to the input going in as the band was playing the song down, that was one thing. When you played it back, if you were a good engineer, you got this little bonus, usually, which entailed a little bump in the low end. It sounded a little more warm or fat. Some of the transients, when I say transients, things like the snare drum, which seems to be so important for the backbeat to people, and people really listen for the snare sound, even if they don't really know what a drum kit is or what it does, they can feel that. I think with analog, going in, you got one thing, you hear it one way, and coming back, it soaked it up a little bit, in other words. So you could really slam it to tape, and that's what people seem to call tape compression, is it comes back where the tape has actually soaked it up a little bit, and it's not going to blow your meters out. I found an instance just recently in the last month with digital. I was recording at Pro Tools, and a new microphone that I was trying on a snare drum was so fast at catching the transients, which I was excited about, but I had to turn the level down so much because I was red lighting digital every time. So I think in the beginning especially, a lot of engineers who were trained analog were doing those same kind of things. They were engineering as if they were going into analog, but they were getting overloads, they were recording too hot, they weren't getting the artifacts of the low end, so they started EQing things differently to get what they thought was that warm sound. And it just changed, and it took time for everybody, I think, to adapt to it. It did for me, and it's just, again, it's like anything, I think just doing it over and over and getting the final result of the sound that you want back is the key. Well, Pro Tools has changed the way I look at editing, and like, you know, you were asking about changing the groove and stuff, things that you're allowed to do, or able to do in Pro Tools, rather. I go both ways on this because I think because you can, doesn't mean that you should necessarily. That'd be my first rule of thumb. But in the same light, I bet you there's a lot of great takes through the history of rock and roll that have been scrapped because there was a major flub or one or two major mistakes, whether it was the drums or the bass player or somebody in the band goes, well, I completely blew it, let's do it again. Whereas now it's so easy just to chop one from another section of the song. We could always do that with tape, and I was trained that way. My first experience cutting tape was kind of funny. I was working with John Hampton, who was kind of my mentor at Ardent, and it was on a record by Eric Gales. And it came to a point where there were 2 different takes. They wanted the first part of this one and the last part of this one where he had played some amazing solos. So we were going to do a tape splice. So Hampton told me, he goes, you're going to cut the tape. I was the second engineer. I was going, no, me? What if what if I goof it up? He goes, well, then you've ruined not one, but 2 takes you've ruined. So you're going to do it right. You know, so he stood with me, showed me the ropes, did it. And after the first time you do that and you play it back and it plays back correctly, you're king of the world. You're like, let me cut some other stuff up. You know, it was really an exciting thing when you learn how to do it and do it right, because it works and it's fantastic. But again, Pro Tools is so easy and quick that I think a lot of producers look at that, knowing they have that in their back pocket, they're not as intensely focused on something that may make that take the best thing that it was, and it might be a little flub. In the back of some producers' minds, I think they're thinking, well, I'll fix that, or he blew it in the bridge, but I can shift that one late snare hit. Sometimes it's cool to be able to do that because you just saved a take that was otherwise great. So again, I'm really open-minded about it. I'm not hardcore either way about it. I think Pro Tools is a wonderful tool, editing tool. But it can be overused in a lot, and I try not to do that. I think everybody knows. I mean, it's one of the hardest. What is the magic take? I remember the first time I produced a record, I was so on pins and needles because I felt as a producer, this is all on me. Everybody's going to come look at me and go, was that it? And I better have a good answer. When you're young and not sure of things, I'm sure I picked the wrong one sometimes for different reasons. As you become more experienced and more confident in it, I swear when the music is going down, I'm not worried or thinking about, is this going to be the right one? You just know, and I think, again, that's just experience and doing it. You at least know what you like the best. You may think this is the greatest thing ever, and the band comes in and listens, and they go, are you kidding me? That's awful. That doesn't happen too often, but sometimes you'll get an argument from the band or something. Sometimes you go back later and you find that you went past one. Working with Alex Chilton and Big Star, that was the case. We had cut some song. It was an instrumental track, and they were really just learning the song. First take, it sounded like the Andy Griffith Band or something, when they were getting back together. It was just honky and horrible. The second take was a little bit better. We went a couple takes down. Okay, everybody's like, that's the take, so we kept that. We'd gone a week or two. We're continuing to work on that take or do an overdub. One night when we were making safety copies, the second take rolls by, and Alex was like, whoa, wait a minute. Play that again. He goes, that was the one. And just because it had so many mistakes and things in it, we had gone right past it. But the feel, he was exactly right. The feel of it, and almost that, there was almost a humor to it. You could just hear how raw that it was. He was exactly right. So I'm always looking, the earlier the better. I think a big mistake is to go, man, if you don't, I don't believe in chasing it down the road. I think if a band's on the floor and you go 4 takes, 5, unless they got to convince me to keep going. At that point you go, hey, let's just go on to another song. Because now you can really start hearing them thinking about what they're doing. Now they're playing not to make mistakes, and they're not listening to each other in the same way. They're so focused on their own instrument and not making a mistake that magic thing tends to go out the window to me. With me as a producer, it's more of a democracy than I don't know, more than a lot of producers. I'm really open. I'm open at least as far as listening. One of the greatest things Tom Dowd taught me was back when record budgets were $200,000 for every record you did, you had plenty of time. You could do things over and over and over again. But I really watched and learned from him that one of the things he used to say is just record the damn thing. We can hate it later. These arguments where people will be pontificating about, yeah, but you see, you got to play this guitar part in the bridge because that's what we do live every night, and I have this in my head, you've got to do it, and the guitar player arguing back. By the time the argument's over, you could have recorded it 1 way, 2 ways, even 3 ways on another track, and you listen back, and really, it's usually obvious which one is the best. Sometimes it's just a matter of opinion that one person likes one person likes the other. But most of the time, if you do it right, the consensus in the room is like, well, okay, you got me on that one. But it turns into this ego battle. Once that escalates to a certain place, it's not about what you're arguing about anymore. It's about who's going to win this argument, And that turns into fistfights with bands sometimes. I've seen that too. I tend to work with bands more than just solo artists. Not that I wouldn't, but I was just on a panel and we were discussing this, working with bands versus singers. There's some producers who go, man, I'm not going to get into that, because then you have, again, more opinions and more things that you have to kind of filter through. What I like about working with bands is when a band has a sound. When you think about the greatest bands in the world historically, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, amongst Led Zeppelin, on and on, don't you know in about 5 seconds who that is? Even modern day, U2, don't you know that's U2 the second that it comes on? There's a sound of a band there. That gets me going. I love when the band fires up and you hear that sound, they sound like them. That's exciting to me. It can be just as fun, though, to get some singer who's amazing and build something around them. I've done that too. My wife is an artist that's kind of the case. She has a band that she gigs and tours with, but this, for instance, this record I'm making on her now it starts with the song, and we built it up with some real drums, some loops. I'm co-producing it with this guy named Henry Olsen from Primal Scream, who lives in London. So it's this whole Memphis meets London kind of idea with her. It's been really different, but really cool at the same time. We've done things as what you might say silly, as we get a loop that we like, and she just sings a scratch vocal with a keyboard part, and we fill in everything else, and she comes back and does her lead vocal later. Or maybe with her, she's such a great singer, sometimes that scratch vocal ends up becoming what these other instruments have played to, so that becomes the lead vocal, So I always believe in catching what you can. Don't say this is just the scratch. That turns out a lot of times to be the real thing. Most of the time when I'm tracking, I will at least try to get a great scratch vocal from the lead singer. I always isolate the lead singer for the most part. There's been exceptions to that rule. One of those was Bob Dylan. He didn't want to go in a booth. He wanted to sit right in front of the kick drum. B.B. King was that way. He wanted to sit right in front of the kick drum. There's a favorite microphone that I use now for scratch vocals, and it's Shure SM7. It's an old, it's been around forever. The famous story about the SM7 is that's the mic out of all the microphones, the most expensive in the world that Michael Jackson could have used for Thriller. He sang it all through an SM7, which is a fairly cheap mic. It has a really great ability to cancel out of the back, is the main thing, but it also has a really cool edge to it that seems to cut through in the track. So since I've been turned on to that, I use it just as overdub vocals too. Sometimes it's just the thing. If you have a really powerful singer, it can take high sound pressure levels without giving up the ghost. But yeah, sometimes depending on the singer, a lot of times you'll have to argue with the singer to well, I was just doing my scratch. Well, I can beat that, but I always keep it because, again, I'll always play top this with an artist to an extent. We've got a certain amount of time that we have, but if a singer comes in and says, I can absolutely beat that, well, okay, go try. And if they try 3 or 4 passes and it's not even close to this feeling they have when they're singing the band, all you got to do is play it back for them. They'll go, oh, well, there's that one note. Can you fix that one note? Sure, we can cheat and do that. But you get an overall better performance sometimes. What's the most important instrument on the record? The voice. As far as actual physical instrument, that's hard to say, because I think I think that depends on the genre too, what kind of music. If you're talking about hip hop, it's got to be the bass. If you're talking about rock and roll, it's a combination of the bass and the drums. I don't believe you can overcome a bad drummer. The groove has to be there. So in that sense, you've got to have the foundation. You've got to have good solid rhythm tracks before you can start piling on, or you're just going to end up with a big muddy mess of trying to fix things that don't need to be fixed, or piling on the overdubs until there's no space left and no room sounds left well, if we get that shaker in the bridge, it's going to tie it all together. Sometimes that can work, but most of the time not. Another answer to the question of what's the most important instrument in the room sometimes is the room itself. I like to off mic things a lot. I like to hear the room. I like to hear the sounds of the room, of the instruments in the room themselves, whether it be the singer, the drums, or whatever. It's taken me a long time to figure out how to do that right, or at least what I perceive is right. And nothing's right or wrong in this biz, but I at least know what I like to hear, and how much room, and how I like to record to get that feeling. But again, I love old recordings, and even recently there's been some multi-tracks going around of these old Motown songs and stuff where you get to just solo up the drums and hear how they recorded, and the leakage is all coming in to each other, but you put them all up and turn it on, it's 8 tracks, and it's like, wow, there it is. And I've learned a lot from that because we have all these tracks and we tend to individually record things, make them neat and tidy in their own sense, fix every little thing separately, and then try to somehow put it all back together, I think has become a big mistake. They didn't used to do that because they couldn't do that. I think the solo button is the most overused thing in the world today in recording. I think the solo button is the enemy. You have to use it sometimes if you just can't hear something, but it's a good lesson that an older producer taught me once. He came in and I was doing an overdub, and I was doing a guitar overdub or something, and I had it 5 times as loud as everything in the mix. He said, "What are you doing?" I go, "Well, I just want to make sure that I hear everything in case he makes a mistake." He goes, "How do you know if you got a good guitar sound or not? If you don't have it somewhere back in the mix where it's going to end up, if it's dull and you can't make it out when it's tucked back in, you probably don't have a good guitar sound. You probably need to do something about that. Change the mic or add some cut to it or whatever." But it was just a revelation to me, and it's something I'd done. I'm like, well, I've got the snare drum in solo, and why? It's got to sound, you're catching the air around the kit. Snare's got to sound great, but the time taken to spent on individual things to get them all to sound good individually and then put back together, I think is a big mistake that I've tried to overcome. If I was recording a huge band with horns, background singers, keyboards, organ, whatever, I would try to get the initial performance. I would try to get everything I could at once. Probably wouldn't put if space was a problem or I ran out of ISO booths or something, I think the singer would need to be isolated. I think that the background singers would probably need to be isolated. Maybe even the horns, because it depends on what type of recording you're going to go for. If you're going for an old school recording like a stack sound, well, they were all in the same room together, and yeah, there's going to be horn leakage in the drums. There's going to be drums in the piano. So I kind of see, if we're going for a modern, say for Chicago, the band Chicago, for instance, they had a pretty clean sound. I would imagine that was built up, drums and bass, and then add your guitars, and then everything is done one at a time. Maybe tracked at the same time to get the drums to feel right, and then things replaced or overdubbed to get everything more clean or clear. But if you're going for a good live recording sound, which it also cracks me up on that note that so almost every band says, I want it live, but they don't want it live because they want to fix all their mistakes. To do that, you have to, I don't know, here's a good analogy for me that I kind of just discovered, is that the better the band is, the farther you can pull back the microphones and let leakage be leakage. The better the band is, you can do that. If it's a band that can't make it through a take without somebody blowing it, then they've kind of blown it for everybody, unless you're going to edit from another take, which is easy enough to do too. But so a lot of times bands start off going, I want to do it live, man. I want that old school sound, and they jump in, start doing it, and go, well, can I fix the bass? Like, well, you can, but your amp's in the drums, so you were a half step off. You're going to hear the old half step off and your new note together. That's not a pleasing sound most of the time. We're going to have to redo it, or we'll have to steal it from somewhere else because there's no getting it out. Another thing about live recording is to me that learning how to get the leakage right is something that's come with experience too. I was lucky enough to work in New Orleans at Kingsway Studios for several records at Daniel Lanois's place. And it's the open control room type thing, where there's not even a wall between you and the drummer. You're just all in the room together. I walked in and I was mortified of like, I'd read and heard that that was the way, but I didn't really think that, how am I supposed to do, what am I going to do? And the band didn't want to use headphones, they wanted monitor wedges. So I'm in the middle of a room that's got this roar going on, loud guitars, loud everything. And I'm smashing headphones to my ears trying to tell what's going on. Well, I realized real quick, forget it. You're not going to be able to hear what's going on recording-wise until you play it back. So it was very exciting in a way to do that. The way I handled that is I had one of the guys in the band who was he was the monitor engineer, so he ran the monitor wedges. I didn't have to worry about it. Give everybody what they want in their monitor wedges. My job was to place those monitor wedges where they could still hear them, and it wasn't going to mess up my recording. So it was a whole nother set of problems. But it was amazing when you record it and play it back how little that mattered. It wasn't a big deal at all. And I go, I get it. And then there's this real sense of, wow, that take went down live. You hear everything together. And then when you're done with that, you're like, we're almost done with this song. This isn't going to be a week-long process to finish out this song. That's exciting, too. You kind of, wow, we got the song, we did it. Whatever you want to add to it, some vocals, horns, or whatever, then we're cool. But to know that you've got that much of it done and everybody's happy with it, that's exciting. I think if you're producing a session where you're trying to get everybody captured live in a take, definitely there's a whole new set of problems to deal with. Yeah, if it's one guy, if it's the bass player who blows it every time, everybody's gonna, they're gonna be punching him in the arm in the control room on playback. Yeah, great take, except you blew it again. Let's go do another one. Then, that can build frustration. If there's already tension in the band, which a lot of times there tends to be when just the band dynamic, depending on who they are, it can cause some problems. If everybody's safe, but it's also, if you've got everything isolated, and again, you're going to pull everything apart and put it back together later, then that's, if everybody knows it doesn't matter, yeah, there's a whole nother set of problems with that because, then the bass player knows that he's barely holding on to make the part to get it right, but he may just go next door to the bar and have 3 or 4 beers and I don't care, it's just the tracking, I can fix it. And so you get that attitude going on, and that can snowball on you to where nobody's giving a crap about the tracks. Like, well, all we're doing is trying to get the drums. Nothing else matters. It's cool. So you got twice the work, twice the time. You're not getting a live feel, But that's the way a lot of records are made. So I really want the sound of the drums I want there to be room sound in the drums. So there's a few tricks that I use to maximize that. Or one of the things I do for room sounds that I've just done for the last 10 years probably, is I always take a mic, usually a wide diaphragm condenser mic, and I'll put it at an angle just off the floor, maybe 18 inches off the floor, behind baffles, right, 6 feet back from the kit. And I compress the living crap out of it to where if you were to solo that track, it sounds like, the Bonham kit or something. It just way overdo it. Distort the input a little bit, crap out the mic pre, this real ugly, hairy thing that lies beneath. But I found you sneak a little bit of that into your good sounding drums or the things that you've recorded well, man, it just gets big. It just jumps out, starts jumping out of the speakers. Sometimes it's just a mess and you can't use it. There's a thing called I can't remember the model names, I'm terrible with that, but there's a Yamaha subwoofer microphone, and we used to actually do this with NS10 speakers, is we would, they're both transducers, it's just working in reverse. So the cone of the speaker is the diaphragm of your microphone, and we would wire it up to record that, and that's where so many people were doing that. That's where that little thing came from. They dressed it up a little bit and made it look cooler. But when the diaphragm's that big, you're getting you're really catching the low end. And again, in and of itself, it's a pretty, it's not the greatest sound of itself, but it doesn't matter. It sometimes really adds that low thing. It's cool. When I'm working with baby bands or people that don't have a lot of studio experience, it's a whole nother thing too. You really do have to teach them pretty much everything. There's a lot of things they just don't know, and that as a veteran of recording, I got to remind myself not to be flippant or even snobby about it, if you will. Like, well, everybody knows that. I got to remind myself they're young and they don't know any better. They really think that a Paul Reed Smith guitar hooked into a Mesa Boogie amp is going to sound good, because it costs the most. And I see that, one of their favorite bands, they've seen them on MTV, and they got these cool looking guitars, and I've never heard of that combination sound good ever. But you have things like that where, well, this is my gear. I had one young band come in, he had some piece of gear, a delay pedal, where he had a 20-second reverb set on it. 20 seconds. And so the whole sound, once it got going, was just rolling over each other. It was just this, I love big cavernous spaces, but it was just a mess. And I went and looked at what he had set, his settings, and I went, well, here's the problem. He goes, but that's my sound. Well, I'm not going to say, well, your sound is awful, There's ways to achieve this big, cavernous, roomy thing without a 20-second delay on your, or not decay on your reverb. Things like that seem obvious to me. And singers, a lot of times, they're mortified to hear their voice. And I got to remind myself, I've sung on backgrounds on tons of records where I've just been part of a group or like just get up out of the chair and go sing it with them. I do that quite a bit, and it never ceases to amaze me when you come back in, that feeling of like, that's pretty good. I'm mortified hearing my voice on an answering machine, so I understand, and being on the other side of the glass gives you some perspective. But things that happen out there are not what are real. There's two speakers, and everything's mixed together and coming out of those two speakers, or one in the old days. Jim Dickinson says this a lot. Recording is not a natural act. It's really an art form to figure out how to capture that and get it to come out of those two speakers and make you feel something and capture the essence of what that band sounds like, the essence of the song, what that's supposed to make you feel, what emotion that's supposed to evoke out of you. Then you're doing something. Distortion is a tool that I use a lot personally. I like aggressive sounding stuff. I've found, and again, my love for old recordings, a lot of that is because they weren't necessarily recorded by our modern standards very well. If you listen to Aretha Franklin records, she is crapping that mic out so bad, or it's overloading, it's crapping out somewhere. When she goes for it, it's distortion, and it's you can just hear it plain as day. But when you're listening to Respect in the car, are you listening for mic? Just only engineers and people hear that. If you're listening for it, it's right there. But what a feeling she has on that song. It sends chill bumps down your spine. It just doesn't matter. Now, I use distortion in a number of ways. Again, on drum sounds and stuff, sometimes I'll overdo stuff. I use parallel compression too, which means you're sending a signal. You've got your regular drum kit trying to making it sound good and natural, and then I'll send it to a compressor that I'm maybe overusing or distorting the inputs a little bit and sneaking that up underneath it. It can really be powerful, and without just turning your drums up louder where you run out of room to put anything else on top, it makes it really pump and really vibrant and makes you really feel the power of the kit as if you were in the room. So I love distortion. Just the other day, one song, it was this kind of Al Green high rhythm section kind of thing on Susan's record, and the hi-hat was just, it was recorded well, but it just, pss, pss, pss. I stuck it through a Sans amp, or a Line 6, a guitar distortion box to distort the crap out of it, and then there it was, and it guided the whole song, just like on those Al Green records. You hear those the hi-hat, without it, it wouldn't be the same. I used to be the type of engineer that would work on my drum sounds, then get the bass in there, and then add the guitars, the piano, whatnot, and get it all going to where I left enough headroom. Then I put the singer in, float that across everything, and bam. So it was kind of like building a house. I had an experience with Glenn Johns where we were recording this artist named Kelly Willis, and it was for a Big Star tribute record. Anyway, I was thrilled to be working with Glenn, and when we got the songs recorded, he said, I'm going to let you have a shot at mixing this. All these years, I've always mixed everything I've done, but let's see what you can do. So I was thrilled and excited. I said, is there anything, before you go in the other room, anything that you want to instruct me on? He goes, yeah, don't turn on that computer. No automation, just do it. So he left, and I've been working on for maybe 20, 25 minutes, and he comes back in the room. He goes, what do you got for me? And well, this is the times when I was building. I had the drums kind of working then. I go, well, I really don't have anything to listen to yet. I've just got the drums going. He goes, well, let me hear it. And I go, well, it's not, okay. So I played a little bit of it, and he was like, not too bad. Do you mind? And I went, no, I don't mind. Have a seat, He just goes, pulls the faders down, and he just starts pushing them up, pushes everything up, and then just makes his balances, does a little of this, a little of that, asks me for this or that on some outboard gear. Spends about 25 minutes on it, stands up and goes, print that. So we printed that one. Then he goes, whoosh, breaks all the faders back down, does it again, just pushes them all up, starts going for it again. He does that 3 times, turns around to the band and says, pick one of those, it's your mix. They were all different. But I was blown away by that, in the fact that if this was recorded right, you have the option to do that. You can just push up all the faders, and you got to know about headroom and be able to leave yourself enough room. That's where I think a lot of engineers, especially young engineers, get into trouble. They just keep turning things up. In the digital age, we can just put these digital limiters, and everything ends up just getting. So I still engineer in a more analog way as far as what levels I'm getting and what the overall level's going to be. But I like to now, I try to always have that in mind. I like to record things in the way where I can just push stuff up and go from there. I have done everything except one record, and that was a couple of years ago, this artist named Rob Junkless. I had attempted we'd recorded it over the course of 2 years, off and on, not steady, but I was very inside the record, and I tried it twice, and Rob was happy, the label was cool with it, but it was one of those, they weren't freaking out cool about it, and this music was so strong to me, it just had to be this certain thing, and I tried it once, I said, please let me go back and try it again. So I went back and tried it again, and I got it again, it was okay, it just wasn't outstanding, and it wasn't jumping out of the speakers, and I met this young engineer named Matt Pence at Tape Op, who was in the band Centromatic that I ended up producing down the road. But he's a young, up-and-coming guy, and I was telling him the story, how frustrated I was with this, and he goes, well, look, he was young and eager and had a studio. He goes, let me take a shot. So I sent him the tracks to one, and he sent it back, and I jumped out of my seat for joy. I was like, that's the sound. He got it. So that instance is the only record, really, that I've let somebody else, and it's not because it's a control thing. It's usually just because I hear what the vision has been in my head, and with the artist, working with them through the whole recording process, I always try to picture the end game. And in this instance, I just wasn't getting it on my own. So I wasn't afraid to turn over the reins, and he did a great job on the record. So if something's not jumping out in the mix, sometimes I think if you're going to reduce EQ, it's probably some other instrument you need to take away from. You've got to carve out a hole for it to come through. Probably the instinctual thing and probably the overused thing is to reach up on something that's not cutting through and brighten it up. But if you do that across everything, you're ending up with a mix that sounds harsh and hurts your ears. So you kind of got to balance those two things, and you kind of got to learn what instruments make the space for this other instrument. Where do you go if your bass isn't coming through? Where do you go on a B3 or a piano to carve out a space to make the bass come through? You just kind of start knowing what frequencies are there, and you kind of, okay, there it is. And it's amazing sometimes how these things build up and fight each other, and you just make a little space, and They want to be heard. For young producers and engineers, one thing you've got to do is educate yourself on the business side of things, and you've got to be aware that producers and engineers are the last guys in the chain to get paid. You do work, you pour your heart and soul into things, and people just don't pay you. It's going to happen. You've got to. It used to just tear me down. I would get so upset, not just because I didn't get a paycheck, just because how could these people that we've been through this experience and they're happy, and it's not just because they don't like the record or something. It's never that. It's never has been that. It's just that you get forgotten about, and they, for whatever reason, they just don't feel like they have to pay you. I did the whole contract route where I would make everybody sign a contract before I went in. We'd talk about it. I'd have them read it back to me. Do you understand this? But a year goes by after the record's been out, and they just glaze over like, I didn't know I had to pay for that. It's unbelievable. Educate yourself in the business, but don't be such a stickler about it. I've found I don't do contracts anymore because then you just have a disagreement on paper. What I like to do is have the understanding with the artist or the label that where they actually tell it back to me. They tell me what our deal is, and I make the deal so simple that we will not forget that conversation. And if they want to sign a paragraph thing that here's the main points of our conversation, but the 10-page contracts to me are worthless. If you're doing U2, that's another thing that they're going to sell a gajillion records. Yeah, then you need to have all that down. But for local indie bands, just as a young engineer producer, know that there's going to be some shady deals down the road. There's going to be some heartbreak in not getting paid or people not doing what they said they were going to do. You can put a coat of armor on, or you can continue. I've thought about that too. Well, I'm just not going to do this unless I get this, this, and this. They got to pay me half up front, and I'm not going to push a button until they do. It's just you'll be at home alone, and you're going to be right and correct, and you'll be home not working is what you'll be. So it's not always about being right and or being righteous even. It's I just got to be the way I am. I want to work. I want to make records. So you just got to arm yourself the best you can and try to be as clear as you can with your business deals. Again, depending on what your background is, if you've been recording from high school on, if you've been recording your friends' bands and you know a thing or two about a thing or two, maybe you want to go on a fast track. I would always say educate yourself, though. I just think it's invaluable, whether it's a full sale 10-month program or I personally suggest a 4-year college program. And it's funny you ask that because after 18, I dropped out. I went to the University of Memphis recording program, and I dropped out with 10 hours left to go. And I'm graduating May 3rd of '08. I'm finishing it up after all these years, and I couldn't be happier about it. I think that just the experience of going to college and getting a 4-year degree, and what I'm taking right now is biology. I'm going to go home and study biology tonight with labs and stuff. That's what I'm doing. I'm leaving recording sessions at midnight, going home and staying up till I can't keep my eyes open anymore, studying biology, and it's not easy for me. I don't have chemistry and biology background. Really enjoying what I'm learning. Will it have any effect on what I do? The answer is yes. I'm learning all these things about how these microorganisms work and things, and it's making me look at music in a different way. I just think it's invaluable to go to school, especially to a 4-year program where you're going to get a well-rounded thing. Also, let's all face it, very few people can make a career in this, and if you have a 4-year college degree, you can go somewhere else. I kind of chose I heard someone say, I think it was Wynton Marsalis, said when he was leaving to go to New York City, his dad said, what's your fallback? And he said, I don't have one. He goes, okay, you'll be good then, because there is no so if you don't have that attitude, and when I came into it, I'm going to do this sink or swim. I'm going to give everything I can to it, and I did, and so I've been lucky enough to continue to work all these years. But that being said, a 4-year degree program does give you a chance to, if you get in and just decide it's not for you, if you don't like dealing with crazy people who don't pay you and things like that, then if it's just not for you, it's great to have something to fall back on. So without a doubt, get get your education. One time when I was a student, it's been 18 years ago, and I was in a beginning recording class, and Jim Dickinson came in to guest speak to our class. And he sat there and talked about this or that, but one of the things, and I was really struggling. I wasn't very good. Compared just in our class of 15 guys, it wasn't like my project was picked every time as the best one in the class. By the time I graduated, it was. But starting off, I really, really doubted if I had what it took, just because I would try as hard as I could, and my stuff just didn't sound good. Got to the point where I was nearly going to quit, and Dickinson came in and he said something so simple. He said, what you're doing as an engineer is you're capturing these molecules out of the air, you're turning them into electricity. While it's electricity, you have the ability to manipulate them how you want, whether you're compressing or EQ, and you're manipulating these electrons, and then you're going to turn it back into air again. It's going to come out these speakers. That's your job. And it seemed odd to me that I was just like somebody hit me over the head with a ton of bricks. It stunned me. And most of my classmates got up and left and went on to about their business. I couldn't get out of the chair. I was just sitting there thinking, that makes all the sense in the world to me. Something so simple, but it changed. It's like from that day on, my stuff slowly started sounding better. A good or bad producer? What would make a good or bad producer? Again, that's in the eyes of the beholder or the eyes of the band. I don't run my sessions with an iron hand. I don't yell at people. I don't yell at the assistant engineer. I've seen plenty of guys who do. I don't like that. But it seems like some of those guys who act that way are the ones that make tons of money. To me, it's never been about that as much. I mean, yeah, I gotta pay for a loaf of bread when I go to the store, so I'm not against money. But to me, it's more about creating a vibe that people are comfortable. People who work with me tend to come out of the experience saying, I didn't even realize I was recording. It was comfortable. We laughed all the time. We had a great time. I love the way it sounds. That's what my goal is, to make them come out the other side and want to come back and work with me again and make another record. To a point. I don't want to produce. I have clients where I don't want to do every record on them. I don't think it's fair to the artist, I think at some point they gotta work with somebody else. Even if it's to the point of go work with somebody else and then come back and see, maybe you'll realize what we had going on, But I think it's good for the artist to switch it up every now and then. What I think makes a bad producer is, to me, people who yell and scream and throw things around and scare people into a performance. It can work. It's just not my style. So people tend to, whatever you get good results from, I guess makes you a good producer. But my style is certainly not to beat it out of people, if you will. What's the best way for a young engineer or producer, or somebody who wants to be a producer, to get into the business, or what can they do to further their career or jumpstart it, if you will? I think the answer to that is find a way to be able to start sitting in on sessions. That's not always easy to do, but it's easier than a lot of people think. Sometimes what I look for when an assistant engineer comes up to me is, can I sit in on your session? Sometimes it's cool, sometimes it isn't. I always have to defer to the artist. Is it going to bother you if this young guy comes in here and sits on the couch and is quiet? And that's the other thing too. Got to keep your mouth shut. Nobody's going to be impressed if you raise your hand on the couch and go, that third note was flat that he sang. Everybody's going to turn around and look at you, and you're not going to be asked back the next day. You can blow it that easy. But I believe in getting an education, getting the fundamentals down, understanding the physics of sound, and understanding how microphones work. Those are your tools. Getting that down pat is extremely important, because when I'm working now, I really don't stop and think what I'm doing. I just do it. And that just doesn't come overnight, That's from years and years of doing it in different situations. So to young people, I would say, if people ask me all the time if they can come sit in my sessions, and sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But if they ask me and ask me and ask me, and I feel like they're a good guy or a good gal that really want to learn, how am I supposed to say no to that? You just figure a way to get them in there. Like, okay, well, you can be our runner, or you can go get us sandwiches or whatever. But being on the couch and watching the dynamic of a session, and not just one guy, not just the way one guy produces records, but the thing that I was lucky at, it was when I was working at Arden, I got to work with all these great producers that were from all different walks of life, that came from a complete New York guys are different than LA guys, are different than Nashville guys, are way different than Memphis guys. And you see all these different styles, and to me, I would just take the things that I thought each of them did that was really cool and put my own stink on it, you know, like, that really sounded cool, but I wonder if I move this just a little bit. And then it becomes your own thing. You know, then you develop a style. So that's the most important thing. Try to figure a way to get into sessions where big or small studio, it doesn't matter, you know. Find a way to start being in the rooms when it's going down. Nothing's a substitute for that. And get your education is very important too. You've got to learn the basics. My first group, I'm a little different, but the very first group I produced was due to the fact that I was a staff engineer at Ardent. Hadn't produced anybody yet, really, other than a demo here or there. And they bought a new console. They bought a new Neve VR console. And I was going to be the second engineer with Tom Dowd on the Leonard Skinner record, and Allman Brothers coming in right behind him. And they just put in this new console. They'd done all these things to the room, and they had an outside engineer coming in. They needed somebody to know that console backwards and forwards. So they said, some little band from Michigan called the Holy Cows called up, and the studio manager said, okay, we're going to give you this super discount deal, and this guy's going to produce you. I know you've never heard of him, and if you're not happy, you know, it's all good. So I was lucky to have the back support of that. They would usually, when they would sell me as a producer, they would say, if you don't like what he does, if you're not happy, we won't charge you, blah, blah, blah. So that was really key to me. But I just got a gift handed to me, you know, and so I did those guys, and then from then on, everything went well, and they weren't afraid if the phone rang and so-and-so was busy and so-and-so was busy. We got this young guy here, he's half the price, and, you know, give him a shot. Again, if you don't like him, we're all cool, we'll wait till so-and-so's available. But I got a lot of opportunities that way. And, you know, I would also go out and hustle and find bands back in the day. You know, when I was still in school, after the Allman Brothers record that I was the second engineer on, I ended up becoming getting to engineer all Greg Allman's vocals and stuff, because, long story, but the engineer got punched out by Dickie Betts one night, breaking up a fight between Greg and Dickie. And the engineer leaves, his nose is broken probably, and he's gone. Greg and Dickie go on in another room, they make up, they come out, and Greg's like, I feel like singing. And I'm like, well, where's the engineer? And I'm like, well, he's probably in the hospital. And he's like, well, you know how to run all this? And I go, absolutely. So he put me in the chair, and I got to finish out starting to record all his vocals. Then Tom Dowd saw that I could do that. And next record he brought to Ardent was Primal Scream, and that was my first major label record. So everything kind of just went like that for me, and which I think is the natural progression. I've talked to people before. I've been on a lot of these panels and stuff, and there was a guy on a panel with me once, a producer panel, and he didn't make any bones about it. He goes, man, I live in Hollywood. I just started going to parties and telling people I was a producer. So there's many ways to get there, and he was very successful. There's many ways to get there, but you know, go out and find a young band that needs somebody. And I used to, you know, when I started producing, I thought that meant I had to comment on everything, or I had to have something to do with everything that happened. Big mistake, you know, I overproduced. So slowly I learned that, you know, the results that I wanted would come easier. You got to let things happen.